Well, I'm with the Chief Constable, Gary Roberts. The yearly reports come out, although be it a few days early, we're doing this sort of topsy-turvy. So everyone's already had the headlines, and the papers have had a great go at it, and it's been sensationalism, I mean, drugs up, and all that sort of thing. But I know there's always much more to it. In fact, it's quite a large report this year particularly, and it goes to Tynwald for approval, which is coming up next week, right? Or whatever.
Well, it goes to Tynwald in July.
So
right. The Tynwald papers come out at the end of next week. I was really keen that people got the chance to read it before it came out in the Tynwald papers, and I was keen also that people who do your job had a chance to read it before it went to Tynwald. So the paper did get first bite at it. Forget the headline, the story is a really balanced story which paints the picture of we do a lot of different things, we do a lot of crime, we've done an awful lot of drugs work in the last 12 months, we've dealt with a lot of issues around mental health and mental well-being, we've had to contend with the pandemic, so it paints a picture of how complex our world has been in the last 12 months.
Okay, well let's break it down to, I'm happy for you to kind of take us through the different aspects of it, but the numbers going up massively, the crime rate, the drug rates, all this sort of thing, up, right?
So we seized about £1 million worth of drugs again. That's third year running. So if we seized it in one consignment, that's one crime. Mm-hmm. If we seized it in 600 odd consignments, as we did, that's 600 odd crimes. Well, it's the same amount of drugs. So what happened in the drugs world is the supply chain changed because of the pandemic, because the borders were shut. So we were seizing lots of small amounts instead of fewer big amounts. And with the borders reopening again now, the supply routes will change again, and we'll go back to seizing bigger amounts less frequently.
So it was really just...
That's part of it.
Part of it, okay.
Another part of it is we've changed how we record fraud. So we were looking at people who are being defrauded, particularly online or over the phone, vulnerable people in particular, and their money would go from their account here to an account in the UK or somewhere further afield. The offence in the past wasn't recorded here. It would be recorded in the UK or wherever. We've now started recording them here because these are real people in the Isle of Man, some of whom have lost their life savings to fraudsters. So it's right that we do something here. So that's had an impact on our figures. And then there's an upward trend in violence, and that upward trend has been going for a while. Most of the violence is minor. So we've a new IT system which makes sure that we capture every single report, and we reclassify things that in the past that might have been public order offences, they're down as common assaults. But there has been an increase in common assaults, and there's also an increase in serious assaults, and the serious assault increase is linked to violence, linked to drugs. So you can't get away from the fact that the drugs trade is a big one, and it has tentacles everywhere, and one of the implications of having an active drugs trade is that there is violence that goes with it.
We always get bogged down in this whole business about tariffs, and that's why it's more interesting for the drug people to come into the Isle of Man. You say you've had this hiatus slightly. Now you've got your new operation thing that's come in, that you're looking through a lot more cars and that sort of thing. Is that going to also spike it probably next time round? Because you're going to find more, aren't you?
Yeah, we're running an operation at the border called Operation Strongbox.
Strongbox, yeah.
And that's designed to do a couple of things, one of which is we have a fear that there will be an increase in beatings. Now, when the police take drugs out of the market, and we're becoming quite good at doing that, or when we take cash out of the drugs market, the debt that accrues stays there until it disappears. And one way it disappears is the people involved are forced to deal more drugs, and they're forced to work harder to pay off the debt. Or some people acquire the debt and will seek retribution and will beat people up. So in nearly half of all serious assaults last year, the victims declined to cooperate with the police. In most of those cases, that was because that involved a beating around drugs. So these punishment beatings. And there is a real fear amongst some people, and some of them are really young, who have big drugs debts to organised criminal groups in Liverpool, that when the borders open, people are going to come over and exact retribution. And that's partly what this operation is about.
That'll be in next year's report. I'm jumping ahead here slightly.
Sadly, that's part of the complexities of the drugs world, and part of the complexities of the debate about what you legalise and whether you legalise anything and how you enforce the law. Drugs is not just a law enforcement problem, it's a societal problem, and the roots of some drugs activity are around inequality, where young people in particular see their only way of getting the nice things that they want is to deal drugs. That's really sad, but that's how some of them see it, and they see it a route to nice things, nice clothes, nice training shoes, watches and so on.
Is there a bigger problem here though than anywhere in the United Kingdom? the adjacent island. Do we have a bigger or smaller issue here with things like
We have the same issue.
Just the same?
We have the same issue as you will see anywhere else in terms of drug supply. And drug supply is organised criminal groups sell drugs to make profit, and around the edge of that selling of drugs comes violence. It comes exploitation of vulnerable people. So how that manifests itself in the Isle of Man is young vulnerable people are targeted and initially cajoled but then forced and coerced into dealing drugs. So that might be looking after drugs packages that have come through the postal system and delivering them to other people. They're forced and cajoled into that. If they don't comply, they are assaulted.
Right.
Other vulnerable people are exploited in the same way. There are young girls who get exploited for sexual purposes because it's no different than anywhere else.
So that bit of water that makes it the better high tariff.
It's no different. So in our case, it's organised criminal groups in Liverpool, in other parts of the northwest of England, in the Midlands, who see the Isle of Man as a lucrative place. And in my report, I describe how a big chunk of Manx money was found at the border between France and Spain, which is part of an organised criminal network that supplies drugs into the Isle of Man from the UK, but sources some of its drugs on the continent. It's a complex big thing, and the drugs trade here is a sophisticated trade.
Let's talk about your detection rates, because where is it now? What's your report showing?
It was 43% in the report, which was lower than it
It's
normally
lower,
is.
because it's 49%.
And I'm changing the way that we record it. So that's the last year you'll see in our report a detection rate. In future you'll start to see outcomes. So we will say, this is the journey of a particular type of crime. So if someone reports that they've been defrauded, it will show at what point in the process we stopped. So did we stop when it was reported and say there are no lines of inquiry, we can't do anything? Or did it progress to court and we lost it at court? Or did we find an offender but we had not enough information to prosecute them? Or did we find an offender and we cautioned them or put them on some diversionary scheme? It will show where along this route that they actually dropped out, and it'll give a truer picture of what the police do.
So no more number now?
The number will be there, there'll be numbers there, but they'll be more sophisticated, but we'll show them in an easier to understand format.
43% sounds low to me for a small island. I mean, we have this discussion probably every year.
2 or 3 times what you'll find anywhere else.
But it's a small island.
It's a small island, yes, but
you're dealing with lower level crime in general. I know I'm being very general here than other places. No? You don't accept that?
Well, so
okay.
The serious assaults that we've had, 46% of people don't cooperate. Well, we don't detect those crimes. So we're talking about very serious assaults,
yes.
Broken limbs.
But we also have some very trivial stuff. Milk off.
We do. And there are some things that we record that other police forces wouldn't record, and there are things that we investigate that other police forces wouldn't investigate. But that's right, that's what we should do in a small place. So the detection rate, people will hang their hat on it. It doesn't mean as much as people think it means.
Right.
What's more important is when the police officers turn up, do they do the right things? Do they care about the victim of a crime? Do they show empathy? Do they do the basic things right at the start? They're the key bits. And people on this island are really not very likely to fall victim to crime. Put it into context, we've still got less than half the crime we had at the turn of the century. So 20 odd years ago, there was more than double the crime, and the crime was worse. So in the 1990s, we'd have 600 burglaries a year. Well, we've got about a sixth or seventh of that.
Mm.
That's to put it into context. Where offending has changed is much offending now is drugs. It's enforcement beatings around drugs. And it's online fraud. That's the way crime has gone.
What does it take you to get out to cover a thing? Because there was this high-profile one, and I did know the person involved. Someone was spraying something on a shop. They ring up the police. The police go, "We can't send anyone down. You come up and maybe report it." And it was a really kind of strange reaction. Maybe you didn't know about that one then, because if you ring the police, you expect to come down to deal with somebody spraying, a spray can on a shop or something.
So,
and they were told not to bother.
The thing that people expect us to do most of all is come when they call us.
Right.
Sometimes we can't come.
Right.
So last summer was the busiest summer we've had for 20 years. So the demand levels were through the roof, particularly.
What was causing that?
It was the end of lockdown. So when lockdown finished,
yeah.
and we had a full island, so all the young people were on the island, people weren't going on holiday, people showed a sense of relief, I suppose, but crime shot up. There was a lot more drunkenness, there was assaults, there was antisocial behaviour, there was an increase in mental health problems. So in last year, more than 20 people took their own lives. Lots of people went off intending to take their own lives or threatening to take their own lives. That takes time. So if, say, at 2 o'clock in the morning we've got 8 officers on and we're looking for someone somewhere in the Isle of Man because they've gone to kill themselves, we're not really going to do much else.